Hello, this is Shanae Trudeau here with Bhavani Maki for another episode of the Yogi's Roadmap podcast. If you like what you hear, tell a friend and consider leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes or the podcast application of your choice. Your positive reviews mean so much to podcasters, and it's one more way that more people can find this podcast. We thank you for spending your time with us today. Bhavani, welcome. Here we are.
Nice to see you, Shanae. Thank you for your time.
Same. So I have some questions for you today. And my first question is, you are unpacking the fourth book, the fourth chapter in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, the Kaivalya Pada. What are you finding? What are you finding that's surprising you? What are your tools for memorization? What's helping you retain the information?
Yes. So I feel like I'm, just starting this romance. I've dipped my toes in it for many years, and each time it was like a lightning bolt where I just went, wow. And then I kind of went back to the work of the first two padas. But, the way that I was raised and the tradition through Krishnamacharya is to take them to heart. So it's kind of, now that I think about it, it's like learning someone's name and, getting acquainted. So I've, taken it on as my sadhana to start that memorization process. And instead of, when I first started, taking the sutras to heart and memorizing them, I was hell bent. I love that word because it was that sense of urgency and it was a different tone of my nervous system. And this time it's much more of a organic process. So when I sit for sadhana, I start, by chanting, and then I'll take one on when I feel that I've got it pretty much, pretty embedded in my nervous system. And so, chanting, of course, is a form of breathing. And then I sit for my pranayama, and then I'll do my asana practice. And that way it's something that is kind of coursing through me. And it almost becomes a mantra for the practice, but I'm not holding on to it as a mantra practice. I love using a note card, and I like to write it in the Devanagari. It's such a beautiful script. It's an angelic script. And then I transliterate it into, Latin letters or English on the other side. And I'll sometimes have room or space to write down the nomenclature. Much of the nomenclature is familiar, but it's in a different context. And that's really what this pada speaks about. It's like they say spend 10 years on a pada. It's been at least 10 years. And when you become familiar with the field of self and how we, develop that inner manager, the conscience, we understand, we start to recognize the power, the self-revelatory power of intuition, which is Purusha, what fills us with the dawning light, and start to see the overlay of patterns and how they bleed over into our life and our relationships and our self-talk. And we're aware of it, we're aware of where the ruts are on the road, and the road of trials. And then you realize, like, okay, yoga is not going to make me exempt from having my human experience. In fact, the world is a manifestation of divinity. And, it's like you're, as a, Patanjali says, it doesn't change what you see, but who sees. So you have a different kind of, you come with intensity, but then you learn that intensity is pure energy. and you're cultivating your nervous system, you become a different animal. I mean, you're giving birth to yourself, and the world is giving birth to you and pulling things out of you. So the fourth chapter is really, it's like, okay, you understand the nature of your internal landscape, and you understand that there's horizons that are, open and expansive that you can't see, but we know behind that mountain there's something. So it's like you develop this trust in underlying benevolence that then becomes a form of love, that leaning into, and it's like, okay, it's not always perfect, and there's rough edges, and it's just my ideas of perfection, and so your lens shifts. And so really the Kaivalya Pada speaks about the possibilities of someone who's found that lassitude within themselves. And it doesn't mean that you're not going for perfection, but there is a certain level of integrity that you're upholding within yourself, but it's a relaxed integrity. And you've made enough efforts. You understand the nature of effort, where you have a grip on effort, that you can loosen that grip a little bit and go more into spontaneity. That even the nature of life doesn't become black and white. There's all these gray areas that are available to you. So then it speaks about like, well, what do you do with this? Or how does it move through you? And it like recontextualizes, instead of so much personal nature, the nature of nature, the nature of consciousness, the nature of desire, and how you become an alchemist. Consciousness remains consciousness, and we're nourishing consciousness instead of our goal objective. Consciousness has its own objective, and nature fills in the spaces. So it's really, and I'm not just saying this. This is what, like very astute, erudite, and practiced. You can tell the ones who practice. I mean, that's always the thing. It becomes more and more clear to me as I'm reading translations. I don't know if you're noticing that. The ones who actually are practicing, and maybe the ones who are actually a part of life, as opposed to burying themselves in a library. Because, as we know in the yogic tradition, it really, I mean, yes, there are certificates, and there are, credentials and things like that, even in India, but it's very much an internal experience. So it becomes very apparent who has a very intellectual perspective versus someone who's really has an embodied and human perspective. But that it is a path of shamanism. And this is where you're working with the magic that already is. It's really powerful, and to not through effort or through trying, but simply through skill. It's like having these ingredients and creating an alchemy that supports the way that life unfolds and consciousness unfolds. You become an agent of that. So it's interesting because Kaivalya is often described as like consciousness is isolated and absolutely pure, and words carry a meaning on them, and something to appreciate, as we went through the first pada, and we're understanding the way that we apprehend things. Neuroscience corroborates this, that we don't really see the cause of things, we see the effect. And then our mind will summarize situations based on past experiences, and will categorize them. And oftentimes our categories can become very broad. And in their broadness, they can become very narrow. Ooh, I like that. So we're invited to appreciate complexity. We've peeled back to see these raw, like these streams, and the way that, you know, we have like maybe 5 categories here and 5 categories here, and maybe they're painful, maybe they're not painful, maybe they're useful or not useful, but then there's infinite layers there. And as Patanjali says in the 4th sutra, vritti sarupyam itaratra, is a lot of times people become 2-dimensional, and they are quick to categorize something like anger, you know, that automatically, and there's a lot of layers to it, but it creates a certain train of thought. You know, and we even interpret the way someone's facial expressions are as maybe being angry, and then it creates a whole knee-jerk response within us. So we start to see even into deeper layers instead of being quick to categorize. And we develop a whole other multi-dimensional awareness that doesn't isolate. It actually brings about unity and communion with higher forces, love being my number one. I'm in love with love. Love. And of course, that's going to, you know, cycle through people's systems in different ways. So it's, yeah, it's amazing. And, you know, it's like, okay, you've done a lot of the field work, and then realizing that as much as you're doing the work, it was never in some ways you either. There was a ripening, there was a timing, and it's really, you've worked so hard to let go. It's not even a work thing anymore. It just works to let go. And there's that the words run so, they fall so short, because I love the shraddha, which is a bigger commitment. And it's not even a commitment anymore. It's a spontaneous place of being. So it's exciting that we're going to open this up. It's definitely going to stretch me in new levels and new layers. And I'm right now, I'm really into the taking it to heart phase. And then I'm going to really dig into the study phase and corroborating and using other things. You know, it goes into kind of like a bit of quantum physics and time and sequence. And I have to laugh about the time part, because you know, I don't understand time. It's where my dyslexic blind spot is. So I thought, oh, good, maybe I'll understand it. But honestly, the more I read about time, or the more that I understand it from a quantum level, it doesn't make sense the way that we look at it. So in some ways, I'm bolstered in my myopia, but maybe I'll be able to tune better to it. Yeah, so it's exciting. This isn't even the right thing to say, but long overdue. And it's been a ripening process. So I'm really excited to open that up. And it's a much shorter pada than the other padas. So I think we're going to do it in one series, and hope that, you know, people just make that commitment. And whether or not you've steeped in the sutras for 20 years, it's like even the samadhi pada can be very lofty in some ways, but it's about, you know, expanding our awareness of possibilities. Once we even open that point of view or that possibility, even if we don't get what it is, it creates a shift in our system for the little circuitry, the little neural pathways, the spiritual circuitry of the nadi to open. Yeah, so exciting.
That's so exciting. Thank you so much. So 2 things that I want you to talk more about is, one is that shraddha, that faith, but also trust piece. And then it's like that Yeah, talk to me more about faith and trust, particularly because it's like that leaning into, and what are you, I have read a few translations, not as many as you, but when it comes through, there's the difference between the kind of the intellectual translations versus the embodied translations. And especially, I feel like in the Kaivalya it gets very kind of heady. And so bring it for me down into the body, if you would.
I believe it was Taimani who said where trust is instinctual, faith is intentional. And then, again, all these words have a load on them. And, where we even have that sense of belief where what we see, we believe. And so maybe, it's like you come to yoga and you feel changes in yourself, if you have even if your yoga practice isn't that functional, it definitely creates changes. And then you learn the alchemy of how to use practices throughout your life. So seeing is believing, but we also know that we see what we're looking for. I mean, neuroscience proves that as well. And that there's forces that are beyond something that we can even hold on to or recognize. There's getting attuned to our system where we have like the way that the soul speaks, and it's just like, yes, every cell does a scissor kick across the room. Every cell lights up, the soul rewiring moment in which there's a shift, and you wake up to something that like intuition is really that self-revelatory power that sees the pattern that you hadn't seen before and then goes, oh wow, now that I see the pattern, I see. It's like seeing the circle, and where the circle in India, where they would just have a stone and you draw a circle around it, it becomes a bindu point or a seed point that holds all relationships. Like the number 0 is the most powerful integer because it holds all relationships, and the interconnectivity that's held within the circle, and then the space around it, which is also part of the circle, but it's infinite and it's capacity for capacity. So then we have those getting tuned with those moments where we know something to be true even though we can't hang on to it, and then having that kind of an experience and bringing it into our awareness and getting attuned to what that feels like in our body. Like maybe the blood runs cold, or there's like a rush of energy, or the little hairs on your skin start to dance, or the chicken skin, or the stomach pit, or the heart, like, oh, your heart stops, or your breath, the moment of awe where your breath, you're just like, you exhale, which is where the ego is like dissolving, which was held together by its ideas of how things are. All of these things happen in our system. We're like, oh yeah, I've been here before, and I know this is true because I've felt it and I've seen it. I've had that direct experience. And so I directly know that there's so many possibilities. And when we look back in our life, we can see how these critical moments really were part of that transformation. And this is what that Kaivalya speaks about, is how to galvanize that transformation in a really gentle way, how to hold the intensity where we came hellbent with a quietness and with an ease where we can lean into it. So Shraddha is that culmination where instead of just believing because we see it, or having trust because it's instinctual, all of this falls shorts, or faith, which can be blind. We want to be open to question, not doubt as a undermining force, but as one of like opening new portals and dimensions and worlds. Shraddha is the bigger commitment, that like how can I say that? It's something that you're reaffirming all the time. And all life is reaffirming it for you too, but life will test you, and the beautiful thing is, we're not failing, we're not passing. It's just we're trusting in how life is pulling things out of us. So our level of perception is much more connected, and we really become more of a channel of what we can uniquely do without fear and without goal orientation. That doesn't mean without intention, but it's like, then it said that like you can't go against your intuition, but your intuition is different. It's prajna, it's seasoned wisdom, where you really are taking care of your animal body. You have you know how to feed the fire in your belly, and like what feels good to your animal and your spirit and your heart and your gut and your mind. And then there's a shift because there's like this, as those channels open, there's like an influx of energy and resources. So Shraddha is like, okay, I don't know right now. It's on a need to know basis.
Yeah.
And that's where, we so want to navigate as if there's somewhere to go. But instead, it's like if you needed to know, you would know right now. And being open that the resources or the question or the opportunity will arise at the right time. So samadhi is, when we're living in that integrated state, we're attuned, and it's described as a place of readiness. And it doesn't mean that you're on like the starting box, starting gate, ready to launch, but you're in tune. Kaivalya is where you're actually very connected. We stop categorizing as right and wrong. Karma Shukla Krishnam Yoginas Trividam Itaresham. It's no longer black and white karma. It's no longer right and wrong. It's that sense of, when is the right time? I'm going to go back to actually the past podcast and that Tolstoy story. When is the right time? What's the right time right now? Who's the most important one? The one you're with. Sometimes that's just yourself. Sometimes it's the trees or the ocean or, nature or whatever, or the dishes, the laundry. It's definitely time to do the laundry for me. And, and, what's the right thing to do, which is to be a part of like life's goodness and affirmation. Yeah. So, if we're wrangling with something, it's okay to be curious, but not trying to find the answer. And I think it was Albert Einstein who said it's not, it's like okay to look for the truth, but it's really about not cherishing your opinion anymore, your perspective. So our idea of self begins to dissolve, but we have a healthy enough structure of our ego and our identity. We've got a kind of a grip on it where we can loosen that and really become a spontaneous outpouring, that we're part of the greater integrity and the greater reciprocity, and the sense of fatigue or burden or onus, maybe that's the right word, it's lifted off of us. So it's a place of transparency. And transparency, all these words, have implications for us, but self-transparency and being diaphanous, where there's incandescence that is being shared. And maybe you worked really hard to develop healthy boundaries, and you saw maladaptive systems in your life, and you had to create like covenants with yourself. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to take the hook. I'm not going to do that. You can finally loosen up a little bit and expand understanding through the cup of intuition and the cup of compassion.
And I can't bypass my way there. I can't go there prematurely.
And I'm trying to remember who described it this way. A few translators. It's like, in the same way that a plant will naturally gravitate towards the sun, it's already happening. So we have to develop the sense of the doer and intentionality, and then finally let go of being the doer and realize, wow, God made me this way.
It's like a whole rewiring process for the whole system to tune to my intuition and my instinct. Whereas, the whole, modern education system as it's set up, all the whole workforce situation, it's like, rely on other people, where that's useful at times, but tapping back into that sense of self and self-centeredness, not in a egoic way, but to really find center, or as you say, circling center.
And really interesting in what I've, apprehended from the Kaivalya Pada, it also kind of speaks about relationship more too. It's like, okay, now what do you do with this, and how do you engage with all your relations? And that means like the world of creation. So yeah, being in tune with self, but what's the point of being in tune with yourself if you're isolated? So now you're really weaving, you're like carrying the thread of love and bringing it full circle. And also in that full circle, there's space for the undomesticated and the wildness, the organic, the ordinary magic, the even beyond the world. It's like yeah, it's a beautiful place. So an image that comes to me, and I'm trying to remember the name of the author. Is it Neil Thurston or something like that? And she wrote a book, and I think it was Journey to Tibet. I read it when I was in my 20s, and it's her diaries. It was like early turn of the century, and she was the first Western woman to go into Tibet. And I loved it because, it just was like her experiences there, where you're in a land, Tibet at that point, it was pre-occupation, and the land was really held together by the folklore of this metaphysical understanding, the way that they moved through life. And as they were walking across the, high Tibetan plateaus, and they were on a yatra, so on, a pilgrimage, often from stupa to stupa in different monasteries. And she saw in the distance this, she couldn't believe her eyes. It was one of those things. And it was a cloud walker. Have I told you about the cloud walkers before?
No.
Oh my God. So these cloud walkers, they had the mission of bringing transmissions. And so they would bring these scrolls of whatever kind of correspondence. And you can imagine like the beautiful Tibetan scroll holder with the turquoise and the coral and the mantras on it with the different metals. And they had this scroll, and they would journey. They were the intermediaries between these spiritual centers, and their training in order to become a cloud walker was that, like the lamas, they had to spend 7 years, 7 months, 7 weeks, 7 days, 7 hours, 7 minutes, and 7 seconds in seclusion. There were special ashramas built for them. So it was like a for mano, it was for one person. And it was just a simple, small space. There was a little puka, a little hole in the roof over it, but there were sheltered areas and a little stream of water that ran through it. And it was enclosed. And they would, go through different rites of initiation and enter into that sacred, cocoon, the chrysalis of that space. And they would be given just one simple meal a day, and they weren't spoken to, and they were never called by their name. And so slowly that identity begins to dissolve. And as they lightened up around their ideas of self and they let go of those ideas, because no one was there to like question it or affirm it, but you're in that space of just, being in the yantra of yogic awareness, metaphysical awareness, then you finally come out and you've lightened up so much of all the stuff you've been carrying. So then you can be a cloud walker. And what she saw, Alexandra Neil Thurston, I think it is, was this cloud walker who was carrying like this baton with the message. And every step that they took was like 20 meters. And they have a drishti point. So they kind of have this point of like where they're going, this focus point. And as they're walking, their feet don't even touch the ground. So they're literally flying through space.
Wow.
Isn't that so beautiful?
So beautiful.
I want to find that book again and reread it, because it was one of those spiritual awakening moments for me. It was like, wow, that's possible.
Wow.
I know. What have I been doing yoga for all these decades for? I should have just holed up in my sauna.
Yeah, really. Oh, that's beautiful. Wow.
This is where the stories and the mysticism, are just, they touch us in such a deep way. That magic aspect. And I know you carry that in your classes, in your tradition, and it's part of your personal family folklore, which is what, makes you so special. I was thinking we need to get you out of the desert and into the world.
Oh, that means a lot. Well, it's because I was read to as a child, like that oral tradition of just, being read to out loud and told stories and allowed to make believe and make up stories. I mean, for me, that's really the important piece of having someone who is embodied unpack the Yoga Sutra, because it is a story, and there's so much, like you were saying, there's so many loads on words, and they carry so much. So each word has a story.
I want to share on that a little bit, because Yoga Sutras are a story without end. Okay, it's full circle. It's not a two-dimensional circle. And it's inside, it's outside, it's upside, it's downside. It's, you know, it's a fractal. And something that I was really touched by when I was just recently in Southeast Alaska. Um, and I have history there. My family came through there in the 1840s, and with the Russian occupation, I mean, my relative was Finnish, but he was lieutenant governor, so he was second in charge. And you know, then when the governor, the Russian governor, in his tenure was done, and it was intense, and it was intense because they were there to hoard the resources, and they did atrocities. You know, my great uncle, he was offered the position and he was like, no, I'm going home. Like this, you know, and I can just imagine that it felt wrong for him. You know, it's like, it's not a Finnish attribute to be pointing cannons. And there's kind of like it's part of the spirit of the people where you just let people do their thing and have their ways. Um, and so having that familiarity with a little bit with the culture, I'm always really interested, you know, about the stories of that place and the peoples of that place. And Alaska is really unique in that it has a very significant indigenous population. I mean, it was definitely decimated with the colonialists, colonials, but it's still very much intact. And there's the clan houses, and one of the tribes, the Klingits, I was listening. I went online and I listened to this man speaking about the Klingit tradition and how storytelling was a big part of it. And they would sit with the elders, and the elders would tell oftentimes the same story over and over again, but they wouldn't tell the ending. And the littles would be like, well, what happens next? And they always ended, and they would never tell the ending. And eventually, you know, as these littles are like, you know, trying to figure out what happens next and why aren't they telling us the story, they realize that like they're part of weaving that story, and that's for them, that's a question for themselves. We don't know how the story ends.
Oh
And
my
that's
God.
Shraddha, right? Are you getting chicken skin all over me?
I am getting teary-eyed. I am getting chicken skin. Thank God. Thank God. That is such a relief.
You know, and another thing that I learned about their tradition, which was really beautiful, they have certain, you know, relationships. I mean, when you're up there, it's like you're really living off the land. I love, I only have been to Juneau twice now, but I'm getting it. And I was really gratified that so many of the students from, it was like 2019 pre-pandemic returned. And so I'm getting to know these people, and they're very no frills. There's not a lot of frivolities. Everybody, you know, has a little bit of bush in them and that fuzzy, feral, undomesticated aspect. And yet, like, you know, even the way that I share things changes from community to community. And it's like they know what hard work is. It's not about that. But they're very in touch. Like people harvest, they work with the land, and they're not at the apex. It's like you're totally outnumbered by wilderness. And, you know, I could be eaten is a very much a real thing. So the Klingits, they have like relationships with how they forage or how they hunt, and there's different rituals with different things. So there's a particular mushroom that they eat. It's, I don't think it's psychoactive, but it's just like a nourishment thing. And when they eat this particular mushroom, you know, before they harvest it, you know, they say, hey, I'm going to take you and I am going to eat you. And I'm, you know, I recognize that like I'm taking your life. However, I will make you a trade. And eventually I will give my body back to the earth and you can eat me. I don't know, that was just so beautiful. So it's like we kind of know how the story's going to end, but we don't know how it's going to end. We're all going to be, we're just part of this big, wonderful thread of love that will feed us, and break us, and expand us, and decimate us. And there's really, there's no way around it, and that's a beautiful thing that we can lean into that. And then it gives us a whole other kind of gratitude for where we are in this moment and how we can feed each other. And also, when I'm feeding you, you're going to eat part of me and I'm eating you.
That to me is such an important part of the conversation, to name it, that I am going to die someday. It might be today. And feed the earth, and that's part of the conversation. And part of it is also the not knowing, like to not already know the end of the story. Yes, death is a part of it, and we don't know how it's going to unfold. And for me to hold that in trust, in trust and in love, it's so hard, and it's such good work.
On a need to know basis.
Exactly. Oh, so you've been traveling a lot, and I want to ask you, what are you currently teaching, without giving too much away, the best you can without visuals, since it's mostly an audio?
Yeah, so as far as the sutra content, it's been largely focused on the posture of mind and body, asana. And sometimes I'll mix that in with, a restorative yoga class on Friday night and just set the field in which we're connecting with breath, and chanting is a form of breath and a form of listening. And then there's, always I have time for discussion, because just as much as we're missing the metaphysical download, you do all these practices, but it's to prepare you for the downloads.
Mm-hmm.
Also, a really important part of the yogic tradition is the conversation, where it's not, as you mentioned, this old archetype of education where the teacher is proselytizing and people are just sitting. There's like a sense of hierarchy. So I learn a lot in that situation, and it builds the bhava of, it's like the suctorial, vortex of pulling wisdom out of each other and through each other, and being in that vortex of energy that just clears and opens new pathways. And then I've been touching on the antaraya, which are often seen as, it literally means in betweens, but you could also see it as go betweens. And in many academic descriptions, they're relayed as being obstacles, but in fact, they're rites of passage. They're initiations in which you come to a threshold, and it's a real opportunity for you to make a new choice, or affirm, or even like create more diversity in your understanding, or get more focused, however that might be, and relaying it more, on a life and practical, and they're developmental, and sometimes we will have to go through them many times. Sometimes we maybe don't have to, or it doesn't have to, not every challenge needs to be an obstacle. And then the yogic vitamins, the first one being Shraddha, which we discussed, which are the attitudes, or the um, sentiments, that we're nourishing within ourselves. It's hard to use words again. So that's been the sutra content. And then really going into the nuances of practice as functional movement, where so much of yoga is about making a particular shape, and there's an ideal. It's about and Patanjali articulates it very specifically after the Asana Sutras, which we're going to be picking up soon in the mentorship, probably after the time this comes out, but it'll be available anyway. And this is where the Tasmin Sapi Shvasa Prashvasa Yorgati Vicheta Pranayamaha, that the function of asana is to create a container which is responsive enough. You have enough fluency with your internal dialogue and not just cerebral dialogue, but your system and nature, that you are able to have transmission. So we're really exploring yoga in that way, through functional movement, through being able to move in many different planes with the spirit of the breath. And it's been very profound because, you have to start somewhere. So we're always going to start with a topical understanding, and then it becomes more and more profound and more permeating. It's how energy is moving through us and how our body can support that functionality. So we're going into really nuanced system of musculature and working with the system from the inside out. It's kind of like that circle again, instead of front and back body, side and side, feeling Sushumna, feeling, where Sushumna is she who is most gracious. And what came to me today, and it's always been there, and maybe I'm just connecting the dots, is that grace is intuition. Because grace is that inner voice that can turn a moment into something better. And it's not that it changed what you saw, but it's that you had an insight and seeing a pattern, and then you're like, oh wow. So we can even, part of it is through understanding it as I'm sharing the nature of our physiology and our animal. Understanding that opens up new awareness in your body. And it's just been amazing, because I'll start a class and I'll speak about some little structure in the body, and you can see people have this blank look. They have no idea what I'm talking about. But then through playing with it and turning this little circuit on, you can actually see their cheeks get rosy. There's light coming through their eyes as they get turned on, and it's like they have a sense of it, and now they have something to develop relationship with, which then will mean that they're learning from the inside out, rather than me telling them exactly what to do and it must look this way. I'm just over that. It's stifling. So tuning into this, what's already there, and allowing it, it's like creating the space for it in your awareness. Then this relationship grows, and it's self-illuminating, and I can see in people's systems a shift. Then you can go back to doing, yoga however you want to do it, but it's held in a different context.
It seems like
allows for content to become more layered. Sorry, you were saying?
No, I just got excited.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, yes, you said it allows for content to become more layered. And what it sparked for me was, one is you're training people's attention span. But also it's like, I feel like you're treating us like adults. Like you're asking us to stay with these very nuanced things and really have an experience that's up to us.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm glad that you appreciate it that way.
I
And
so appreciate it.
I mean, it's I honor what people bring, as far as not like, oh, I honor your pain, or I honor your brokenness, or I honor your distortion. Like, I just like, it's an honor, and that everyone has their own beauty, and it's an honor that you're showing up, and it's an honor that you're allowing me to um, guide this field trip of discovery and adventure, and I can show you certain things, but you're going to see all different kinds of things, and then we get to share this experience, and I get to see through your eyes, and we have this shared experience. um it's fantastic. And yeah, many people there are more adult than I am, quote unquote, and I love the intergenerational aspect. And I love the conversation. It's like I'm holding just a space where we can come together and gain more understanding about ourselves and each other. And you know, what brought us there is wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to save my last question for next time we record.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just feel so happy, and like just the little circuits are opening up and the sunlight is shining in and shining out. um, Hari Om.
Hi,